Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi, how was your first date with European poetry? I hope you enjoyed it. Well, here am I with with full vigor, ready to take you on a second date with European poetry. Are you game to this? Do you think you'll enjoy this? All right, okay. In the last class, let's quickly recap what we did. We discussed the poetry of Vasco Popa, a major Serbian poet who has had a tremendous influence on the poetry of Ted Hughes and of course in the collective imagination of the world, and how his poetry offers an extraordinary alternative to the warmongering political mind. As an alternative to the warmongering political mind, his poetry offers with a rich, imaginative, lyrical verse, so that the soil that is the land that's bathed in the river of blood can now bathe in the river of or in the ocean of creativity and imagination. That's an alternative vision he offers. And after that, we went ahead and discussed how under similar circumstances here in Russia, there in Serbia we discussed Vasco Popa, and here in Russia under similar circumstances how Anna Akhmatova wrote her poetry, and how her poetry today offers a kind of a ray of hope for all the disenfranchised people, victims of the totalitarian regimes. How the poet gives us a glimpse of an indomitable spirit that is always inherent in the body of poetry. So let's continue that discussion today with another extraordinary poet. This time we have let's go to Poland. Let's come to Poland and discuss the poetry of Poland's major poet. Okay, here is Milosz, again a major 20th century voice, Czesław Milosz, a major Polish translator, poet, prose writer, diplomat, and very many things. And of course, he also later went on to win Nobel Prize for Literature, probably in 1980. Okay, just check the year, but one of the major Nobel laureates. And also a diplomat. Of course, now is the time for us to know a little bit about the life of Milosz. He was a Polish American poet. Of course, he has his roots in Poland, but during that time, again due to the political turmoil in Poland, his parents had to seek asylum away in Lithuania. So he was born in Lithuania of Polish origin, born to a wealthy civil engineer, and later he went on to become a diplomat. He also served as a diplomat of Poland in the US, and later he, for various reasons, he has to seek asylum in Paris. So again, his life is also marked by a lot of lows, ebbs and highs and lows, and he is also a political prisoner. He was also he has also witnessed firsthand violence of totalitarian regimes and seek asylum elsewhere. Nevertheless, his poetry offers extraordinary insights into understanding human nature and human love. Again, quite at an early age, he published his first poetry collection, and he co-founded a literary group called Zagari in 1931, which played a major role again in spreading poetry across his society, across his land. His poetry first collection comes out in 1932. After the Second World War, well, he went to the United States as a diplomat, as Poland's diplomat, and of course he was also later served in Paris. Having lived under the two great totalitarian systems of modern history, which is National Socialism and Communism, and this is really unfortunate, right? Both of them ideologically talk of building a utopia, and probably what they don't realize is that under the chimera of utopia lies a direct route to hell. That's the reason why it's very unfortunate that those ideologies, those two governments that came riding high on the ideologies of socialism and communism, resorted to a lot of violence and themselves turned the evils that they thought they were fighting against. That's the irony. Okay, so he had to endure those two oppressive systems, and that's the reason why you find in his poetry a kind of an ironic style, and his poetry is marked by a tragic note. A kind of tragedy lurks somewhere behind his poetry. That's we can perceive it, like Charlie Chaplin's Behind the Laughter, behind the comedy of Charlie Chaplin lurks tragedy of modern society. So behind the writings of Milos also, you can find shades of tragedy. Nevertheless, what is important is how they affirm human life, how they sing virtues of hope and courage, because how do you face a totalitarian regime? How do you face an oppressive system, especially as an individual or as groups of small groups of individuals, when you are pitted against a huge system, a behemoth? How do you fight that? Unless we keep a ray of hope in us, unless we are mad and somehow we believe that even our even when there is hoping against hope, desperate hope, unless we are mad to believe in these things, there is no ray of hope. So fortunately Milos kept it, and his poetry is highly reflective of that kind of mad hope, something like that. Even later, though he acted as a diplomat under the government of Poland and served his country in various other nations, his relationship did not last long. The relationship with the government soured and it deteriorated, as a result of which later he had to seek an asylum in France. That's probably true of all great revolutionary poets, right? Because if there is one thing that they have faced, they have realized the value of words. In fact, words in the true spirit, words are revolutionary. They always nurture within them, they always nurture within their semiotic dimension a flame of revolution, So his, it keeps waiting, that flame of revolution for the betterment of society, that keeps waiting for good poets to come, and when it finds good poems or good poets, it seeps into their poetry. So Milos was fortunate enough to have found that kind of flame in his poetry. So, and of course later he joined University of California and began teaching Polish literature. And today Milos's work is known for its classic style. While engaging on the one hand with the political debates of his time and philosophical issues of his time, it also opened another door, another channel of communication open with the classics, with the works of the past, with the works of the legends. That's how you find a beautiful combination of the tradition and the present in his works. So when somebody later asked them how does one become a great poet, he said, he did not mention craft, he did not mention experience. He said, as long as one is true to oneself, remaining true to oneself is the hallmark of a great poet or great poetry. So this is something that is significant, So again, another interesting quote. This is from In Defense of Poetry, an excerpt from there. The creative act is associated with a feeling of freedom that is in its turn born in the struggle against apparently invisible resistance. Right? Of course, these lines characterize poetry of Anna Akhmatova, poetry of Vasco Popa, and poetry of another major poet that we are about to discuss in a very short while, almost considered national poet of Greece, Ritsos. So this is prophetic. These words are prophetic in their best sense. The creative act embodies in its core the spirit of freedom, which is born, which itself is a consequence of a kind of resistance. It is born in the face of resistance. Whoever truly creates is alone. That's the reason why a creative writer most of the times feels alone, because well, if you are under the impression that writing is for fun, of course it's true, it's true. But when you take it to the next level, when you take your poetry, when you take your writing to the next level, you realize that you are alone. Like you remember the great Greek character Tiresias, who was blind but who was bestowed with some kind of Trikalagnana. He could see the past, he could see the future, and when somebody commented that he must be really lucky to have that kind of a knowledge, he said, you don't know, it's a kind of a curse that I carry. Let no man be cursed with the knowledge that I have on my shoulders. So knowing future is truly a curse, and unfortunately most of these great writers carry that curse within them. That's why they say that they are alone in their best creative moments. They are alone, lonely, desperate, and so therefore creativity comes, great imagination comes out of the womb of despair, right? Out of the womb of despair, hopelessness, comes the great ray of hope. That's it is that's the paradox, that's the greatest paradox of creativity. The creative man has no choice but to trust his inner command and place everything at stake in order to express what seems to him to be true. We have realized this, that if you are ready to ferry yourself along wherever the truth takes you, that's when you can be a true poet. You can't just modify what you discover because the political regimes that you are living in don't like it. You can't modify that. If you are doing it, you are not a great writer. That's when you are misusing your position as a creative writer. Of course, many writers don't realize that. We are concerned with those writers who matter to us a lot. Okay. Yeah, though Milos is primarily known as a poet, he is also well known for his collection of essays called The Captive Mind. Captive Mind illustrates the process of how poetry emerges under these kind of circumstances. Especially it's a remarkable book for budding writers, budding poets. So you may, if you are really aspiring to be a writer, if you are nurturing the ambition of becoming a writer, you can please at least read some parts of this particular collection of essays, The Captive Mind. And of course, it's also noted for its insights into the lure of Stalinism to intellectuals, its adherence, thought process, and the nuances of dissent and collaboration with the post-war Soviet bloc. We have discussed how all these systems that rode high on greatest ideologies turned into oppressive regimes themselves. Very ironic, very sad state, and highly tragic. For exploring all these things, he received a Nobel Prize in 1980. All right, so now having known him, let's take a dip in his poetry, at least a couple of his poems. Okay, Gift. A day so happy. In fact, it's like these are fragments, these are no complete sentences, just like different phrases, incomplete clauses, phrases. And look how using broad brush strokes, using broad verbal strokes, this particular poem constructs a picture. A day so happy. Fog lifted early, I worked in the garden. Hummingbirds were stopping over honeysuckle flowers. There was nothing on earth I wanted to possess. I knew no one worth my envying him. Whatever evil I had suffered, I forgot. To think that once I was the same man did not embarrass me. In my body, I felt no pain. When straightening up, I saw the blue sea and sails. Again, earlier, recall in one of our earlier classes, we were discussing moments of epiphany, right? Moments of epiphany is a very beautiful word. Please pick this word up if you haven't already picked it up. This is like an outburst of realization, a sudden outburst of your realization, and whatever may be the trigger. In fact, it's said that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa felt his first taste of epiphany when he came across birds, larks flying across the sky. He just had to watch it. That was his first taste. So there are many instances where you can feel moments of epiphany. In fact, in the Mahabharata itself, when Krishna had to reveal his Virat Darshana, that's a moment of epiphany for people like Bhishma, Vidura, and those who could see. Epiphany is that kind of a sudden realization. It's a bursting out. You are burst out. Something within you bursts out, and you realize something great has happened. Probably, so that's why he calls this poem a gift. So something has happened to him. He has found a door to miracle. He has somehow found a door to miracle, and he has accidentally found it. That's why he calls it gift. And when that happens, he says, I do not envy anybody, because these pettiness, envying, jealousy, anger, these are all products of petty minds, right? So he says, I did not, for a moment I did not feel pain, I did not suffer, I did nothing, I felt that. And I'm not the same man. You realize, see, remember, there is again a famous Zen saying, a river is not same at its 2 points of flow. Supposing here is a particular river at point A, here is river at point B. So though technically it's one river, but it's not one river. That's what Zen says. So I'm not the man I was a moment ago, not even a second ago. So we keep changing. This talks about the principle of evolution, the cosmic spiritual principle of evolution that all of us are in, whether we like it or not. Okay, so the poem talks about that in a very beautiful, extraordinary way. Yeah, and this is another extraordinary poem, a remarkable poem. And in fact, I've seen this poem being used in many heartfulness classes, mindfulness classes, happiness classes, and all that. And rightly so, it has it can also be read as a prayer. It can also be read as a prayer, a poem that has found a wide circulation in areas that probably we did not anticipate. So a widely accepted poem. Love. And the poet here talks of love not in any romantic sense of the term, or not in any familial sense of the term, or not even in any national sense of the term. Love here is, it's in a liberating sense. Love here is used in a liberating sense of the soul, in in that, or in a liberating sense where we realize how indebted we are to nature, how indebted we are to the world that created us, and it's a moment of aligning ourselves onto the higher dimension, onto a higher pedestal. So realization, a love of self, a love of one to the self, something like that. Love means to learn to look at yourself the way one looks at distant things. It's a beautiful thing. Love means to learn to look at yourself the way one looks at distant things. Can we do that? Can we look at ourselves as we look at any other being? So here is a process of nuding ourselves out, bearing ourselves out. We are basically narcissists. All of us are obsessed with ourselves. If we can learn to look at ourselves as we look at others, that means if we can learn to look at ourselves as part of a wider network around, then it leads to a beautiful path. It leads to unlocking a door to another dimension. For you are only one thing among many, right? We are not we behave as if we are the only supreme beings in the universe. If we are under the impression, we are definitely under delusion. There is no other greater delusion than that. No, not when I am saying not just human beings. I mean, we are definitely human beings, are not the cream of creation. What makes you think that you are the cream of creation? You and I are the cream of creation. We are just part. We occupy in this universe, or we occupy in this nature as much significance as an ant has, or as a leaf has, or as a buffalo has. That's when we realize this, when we learn to locate when we try to locate ourselves in relation to others, then it becomes an extraordinary feeling. So that's precisely probably what the poem is saying. And whoever sees that way heals his heart. Here is, when do you heal our heart? In fact, modern life, we are suffering from many maladies, anxiety, fear psychosis, many things, right? So the process of healing begins from here, when we look at ourselves in relation to others. But that does not mean to say that we are diminishing ourselves. In fact, this is where we can recall what Saint Augustine said. God loves each of us as if there were only one of us. Though the world is populated with so many billions of people, things, many other creatures, God loves each of us as if we are alone here. I mean, history, something like that. So when we learn to connect ourselves with the nature around, probably that's when we feel this, again in a highly paradoxical way. And there is another important book called Poetry Pharmacy, and there again it talks of using poetry as medicine. In fact, Poetry Pharmacy is a popular movement in England now. BBC also hosted a series on that, Poetry Pharmacy, using poetry, small doses of poetry, short poems are prescribed to you. If you go to the pharmacist and say you are suffering from this, the pharmacist, here the poet or an aficionado of poetry will give you a poem. So that's when you can cure your heart of that kind of malady. So when we realize this, then what happens? Without knowing it, from various ills, a bird and a tree say to him, friend. When that happens, we realize that a tree next to us, a bird sitting on it, call us and call you, hi, we are your friends now, something like that. That's the beauty, right? So an extraordinary poem. So from here, let's move on to another poem on prayer. So, these are all extraordinary poems. Of course, for want of time and space and many things, we will not be dealing with this poem in detail. We have to move on to another equally great poet, but you can read this poem a little later and see how much of it you can grasp. Again, as I said, understanding poetry is not the be all and the end all. You have to perceive a poem. How much of it you can perceive using the things we have learned becomes important. Yeah. From here, Milos, let us go to Rizos. Yanis Rizos, an extraordinary Greece poet, a 20th century Greece poet. The moment we say Greek, we are automatically reminded of all the Greek myths, legends, stories that we have heard of, heroic tales, epics, Homer, right. Of course, Yanis Rizzo, if you look at his poetry, it seems he has successfully continued the rich Hellenic cultural legacy in his poem, again a 20th century, major 20th century product, and many consider him as, of course, he is a committed leftist, he is a committed leftist. Many consider him as a major Greek left poet. Of course, even without that tag left, he is still relevant to all of us. Like the other poets we have been discussing, this poet too had to undergo, political oppression. He was a victim of, many things, even personal tragedies. He lost his father, he lost his mother, he lost his brother to tuberculosis. He himself, had to get himself admitted, and he was in hospital for several years. So, he was in a sanatorium, he was committed to a sanatorium for a long time. And before he found his calling, in poetry, he worked many jobs. Fortunately, in 1934, his first poetry collection comes, Tractors, and since then, of course, there was no turning back. So, he found, actually it is like a calling to him, he found his calling in poetry. Again, so in 1934, he joins the Communist Party and remained faithful to it throughout, though many criticize him for his blind faith, because see, when you are a follower of an ideology, it is fine, but when you turn a blind eye towards its pitfalls, that is when it becomes difficult for others to digest, right. Because this is probably true for all ideologies. If somebody is drunk on an ideology, then that person will not be able to see the pitfalls of the ideology that he is riding high on. So, that is a valid criticism against Rizzo, but of course, that does not diminish the importance of his poetry. His extraordinary poem, his extraordinary work, Epitaphos, appeared. It is called, in fact, to this day, even to this day, it is called a stunning anthem of the Greek left. That is how it has been described, as a stunning anthem of the Greek left. It appeared in 1936. In fact, that was born out of violence that killed hundreds of people, and the next day when the newspaper reported of violence, in fact, it carried the picture of a mother crying profusely before the dead body of her son, and this particular picture moved him so much that he began composing it, and even to this day, of course, please recall one of our earlier classes how suffering leads to song. Out of suffering, song comes. Shokam shlokatva magataha. In the case of Valmiki, we realize this, shoka leading to shloka, poetry, suffering leading to song. Probably that is the reason why, even Rabindranath Tagore said, at the moment of despair and darkness, it is to song that we must turn. It is to song that we turn in the moments of despair and darkness, because again, songs have the capacity, an inbuilt capacity to uplift us. So, this is his major work. During the Nazi occupation of Greece, he joined communist guerrillas, and when that when they were imprisoned. He too was imprisoned and incarcerated for about 5 years, and later again in 67 he was arrested and exiled. All these poets, Anna Akhmatova, Milos, Vasco Popa that we discussed earlier, all of them, they are they've been persecuted like hell. Like hell. Nevertheless, they did not lose hope. In fact, that's the reason why we are reading their poetry today. Their poetry has an extraordinary capacity to offer a ray of hope to all the citizens who feel their rights are threatened today. All right. He was a very prolific writer. He was a very, very prolific writer. More than 100 books have been credited to him. So he has, to his credit, more than 100 books, and many of them were left unpublished, but later they were published posthumously. He died in 1990. And this is a very significant quotation by Rizos. He says, "I know that each one of us travels to love alone, alone to faith and to death. I know it. I've tried it. It doesn't help. Let me come with you." I mean, now you see what he is doing here, what his poetry does. We are all alone, our love to, these are all travels life. You agree with me, right? Our entire life is a journey, a huge one big journey, from cradle to grave is a one big journey. You want to consider it a pilgrimage, travel, whatever you want it to, it entails a journey with it. So is to love. You have to discover your love alone. Nobody can help you on that. And so is the case with faith. Many may teach you, preach you and all that, but you have to discover your faith alone. We have to discover our love alone, we have to discover our faith alone, and we have to embrace death alone. And it's not an easy task. We feel lonely, we feel depressed, and that's when he says, let me come with you. What does he mean? Let my poetry come with you. So he is offering his poetry as a kind of a companion to take with you in your eternal journey. An extraordinary line. Yeah. His poetry ranges from overtly political to deeply personal. Of course, that becomes evident when we take a look at his poetry. And his poetry is replete with images of Greek myths and legends and all those things. His poetry recreates the high point of Hellenistic culture, and this is precisely what in fact, many consider him as a bard of loneliness, a poet of loneliness. But this loneliness is not of despair, but it's an ennobled loneliness, and this loneliness can be overcome. That's the reason why it can be said that fighting in vain against our loneliness are our ultimate drive. We can derive our drive from that fight against that loneliness, and that's our deepest motivation. His poetry demonstrated that, and that's why he offers his poetry as a companion in our struggle to come to terms with loneliness and grief and suffering. Fortunately, we find his poetic lines. Yeah, here is a poem, The Meaning of Simplicity, a beautiful poem you can read. I hide behind simple things, so you will find me. A kind of, maybe he is talking to his love, lady love. If you don't find me, you will find the things. You will touch what my hand has touched. Our handprints will merge. Look how beautifully he is talking of love. If you don't meet, no problem. You and I have walked on the same ground, so our footprints will match, our handprints will match. So beautiful love, and again, this particular line, every word is a doorway to a meeting, one often cancelled, and that's when a word is true, when it insists on the meeting. How every word, here word again, it's a metaphor for probably a poem. It's a doorway. When we come across a beautiful poem at the right moment, we don't know where that takes us, what kind of turn it gives us. Okay. And he is also well known for another poem of his called Injustice. You can again read this poem when you have time on your hand, when you are leisurely, you can read this poem, and for want of again time, we are rushing through this. So I am sure having come face to face with these great, extraordinary, remarkable poets, I am sure you have enjoyed and found some ray of hope, and maybe some of you may have even found some kind of a companion in their poetry. So if they really excite you, please carry on with that journey. But remember, I will not be there with that on your date. So you will have to carry your third date and subsequent dates on your own. Okay, all right, take care.